For those of you who don't know me, it may seem a little strange for one outside the bridal party to have a speech arranged. You see, I've become our group's informal scribe, the one who commits our acts to paper, picking highlights from our lives and then documenting that behaviour. So firstly to Therese, you are the sparkle in Sean's eyes, the earth that he walks upon, and the stars up in his sky. You are the Kenny to his Sterling, the Ella to his Cronin, the perfect mix of beauty with a little footy bogan. I think that you look stunning, and I thank you for affording me the room to deliver a few thoughtful words about your very handsome groom. Words that I thought long and hard about so as to remember every detail and fact. I'd hate to tarnish Sean's reputation, so I'll try to keep his good name intact. Now here I must apologise, for my initial aim was to be brief, but the thing about Sean William is, the volume of material is far beyond belief. From the moment that we met at the shack way back in '96, every big night out has had a story, and Sully's name is always in the mix. But before I start on big nights out, I'd like to share my first impressions of the man. He wore a torn Jim Beam polo shirt with a BB cap in hand. He had on Paris silkies that in future years became skin tights. But on this night he was young and svelte, like a leopard in full flight. I'll elaborate more on the leopard later, but back to my first impressions of the man. A man who was courteous and responsible, a man who politely declined a VB can. While the rest of us were partaking in beers and 10-second sculls of goon, Sean was preparing to drive home. He had uni the next day at noon. How wrong first impressions can be, and I soon realised my mistake, that the courteous and responsible Sean O'Sullivan was actually a facade, a front, a fake. You see, every night could be an Otana night, and that's what we love about the man, that he can redefine the term loose and still wake up his own biggest fan. Like the time he tried to fight Mike Umaga. That's right, the ex-All Black captain's brother. 6 foot tall, 100 kilos, and a scary looking mother. The year was 1997, and Halifax had come to town as part of Super League's World Club Challenge. Unfortunately for them, they had gone down. It was a Tuesday night, the scoreline 76-0. They were looking to drown their sorrows. Sully had peaked and was now on his way downhill. You see, we'd started off that night in the mood for celebration. Sully had just finished his last exam and was in need of inebriation. We ventured into Fridays for the regular all that you could drink for a mere $20. It was all the bourbon you could sink. When we left that fine establishment, our party numbered 6. There was Sully, Todd and myself. The other 3 were chicks. A short walk to City Rollers, there must have been something in the air, for once we got inside, the girls really let down their hair. Now, I'm not sure whether much has changed, but on this Tuesday night, apart from the 3 ladies in our company, there wasn't another female in sight. So when the ladies hopped up on stage, they became the centre of attention, and this is where our groom decided the girls were now under his protection. The Halifax boys let out a cheer. Front and centre was Big Mike. A comment about a certain dance manoeuvre was all it took to spark Sully for a fight. He leapt to the young lady's defence. Her virtue had been called into question. How dare these English brutes heckle a young lady under his protection? Being the friend that I am, I rushed to Sully's aid, just in time to be confronted by Halifax's front row brigade. Luckily for the 2 of us, cooler heads prevailed, as Big Mike settled the situation and offered to buy us some ale. An olive branch from a man built like a mountain, I was all too eager to accept, but Sully wasn't in the mood to bargain. He had that look in his eye. "I'll fight you all," were the words that he then said. Before a full about turn and heading for the nearest garden bed. It was by that garden bed, as I patted the big man on the back, that we received the biggest razzing ever from the entire Blue Sox pack. That is where I'll end my first tale about the groom and begin the second little story, a story that starts well and truly before noon. It begins with early morning lemonades and 4 blokes who are really, really keen to get their war paint on and sport the baggy green. The Indians were in town, led by that man Ganguly, and Sully was in the mood to compliment him fully. Now those close to the Tana man know he likes to speak his mind, and if you find this trait offensive, you can kiss his ground behind. And those close to the Tana man also know a compliment is hard to find, and that when he hits the bourbon, it's guaranteed he'll lose his mind. So this wee story of mine includes all of these fine traits. We start before we got to the cricket and end with Tana's bourbon swilling state. It now seems like so long ago. In fact, it was the summer of '03 when I still had an afro and Sully looked like Richard G. Quigg. Pumped up for the cricket, we made the trek from Paddington to Woolloongabba with the glow of early morning ale and speaking utter jibber jabber. As we entered the ground, the sky had started to turn grey and then the heavens opened up, well before the umpires called out play. There was little else to do but for us to find the nearest bar and have a few quiet ales as we watched the groundsman from afar. We drank for the entire first session, thinking there may be a chance of play. As usual, those that turned up left for their lunchtime feed away. We stayed inside the ground, not wanting to lose our spot. We were perched up at the bar, who cares if the beers cost a lot? The second session came and went, and our little party hadn't moved. Either had the ground staff, so the covers weren't removed. The tea break was almost at an end when the sun started to poke through, so we grabbed 4 fresh beers and headed down to grab our pews. We saw an over from Uar before Dizzy got the ball, and then the heavens opened up, bringing an end to it all. We'd been at the Gabba since just before the clock had struck 10, seen a total of 7 deliveries, and now the day was at an end. Now our mood wasn't to be dampened, so it was off to the paddo that we'd go, straight onto the spirits, and this is where Tana's night hit a low. Now if I may, please allow me to digress and talk about the mighty eels and how this affects what happens next. You see, Sully's a massive para fan, blue and gold through and through, and when it comes to back rowers, there's only one atop the queue. Nathan Highmarsh was his name. Compared to him, the rest were duds, especially the raging bull from Brisbane. To Sully, his name was Mud. Sully had a set against the Bronx, and in particular the raging bull. I'm not sure what Gordy did, but for him, Tana's compliment jar was full. So now I've set the scene. You can imagine my surprise when Gordy walked into the paddo and was instantly idolised. Idolised by the groom who sits before you. He was all over Gordy like a rash. I'm sure at one point in particular, Sully was trying to get a pat. You see, Gordy had walked in as part of a buck stay in the joint, and I was speaking to the buck before Typhoon Tana came on point. Typhoon Tana came from nowhere just as Gordy held out his hand. Suddenly, Hindy was no more, and Sully was now Gordy's biggest fan. He had his arm around Gordy's neck, whispering sweet nothings in his ear. Joshy and I looked on in horror, and I'll admit my heart did fill with fear. I tried to interject, scared Sully was about to get a pow, but Gordy put up his hand and said, "Your mate is right for now." Joshy and I couldn't believe it, but Sully didn't heed the warning. He was an A-grade pest that night, and we were sure we'd leave in mourning. Finally, Gordon had had enough, and with one hand sent Tana crashing to the floor. As Joshy and I picked the big man up, Gordy had bolted for the door. We checked the big man over, then asked him what was he thinking. He muttered something about the great Hindy, and then accused us of not drinking. We followed the big man to the bar, and that is where I questioned whether Sully had lost his mind. This seemed to be a bone of contention. The result of my questioning, a Sully D&M. If you ask any of the boys, we've all had one of them. But this one was a little special, starting with how all of his friends were doing really well in life, and he just wasn't meeting ends. He started with our good mate Tommy, who was always up for fun, a real old school Aussie larrikin, a man who could talk to anyone. His attention then turned to Joshy and how he had looks to kill. Then the handsome Mr. Hoff, looks wise, he was the top of the bill. Then on to housemate Nico, the newest addition to the crew. He was so full of energy, charismatic and good looking too. I stood there listening intently, waiting for my ego to be stroked. Something to be said about my looks, or how I was his favourite bloke. With his arm around my shoulder, he pulled me close and then on cue, X-Man, well, X-Man, you've got cool hair, ankle shoes. I'm not going to lie to you, my ego was well and truly bruised. I hadn't realised in our group of male models, I was just the guy with the shoes. The bouncer then came over and said, boys, it's past 8 o'clock. If you want to stay in here, you'll need long paired shoes and socks. Sorry. Josh and I started thinking, now what were we to do? A quick walk back to Sal's abode, or was our night through and through? Sully became quite boisterous, telling us this wasn't to be the end, that we should go back to his and borrow some of Miko's ends. It didn't take much arm bending for Joshy and I to agree. We downed our drinks and looked at Tana, who just handed us his keys. I'm a local, I'll be fine, he stated with great certainty. But you two better hurry up, at the bar is where I'll be. We hurried off up the road, both of us shaking our heads. How's he going to stay inside when he really should be in bed? Needless to say, we borrowed some of Miko's threads to quick freshen up, then back to the paddo we did head. Just in time to see the Tana man being denied at the bar. Apparently he wasn't what he thought he was, the paddo's local superstar. Apparently he'd fallen asleep standing up against the wall. And the barmaid had been watching, starting our groom's mighty fall. We got in there quick, Joshy taking Tana while I ordered drinks, but Sully was up for a debate, and so our ship continued.